This lecture deals with the presidency of George Washington. So he's first in war with being the leader of the American Revolution, or the armed forces of the American Revolution. He is first in peace, not only as the President of the United States, but as the President of the Continental Congress, and then first in the hearts of his countrymen, which is why he is going to be selected near unanimously to be President of the United States. You can see all the other people who were running to be our first President of the United States, and the presidency will go to Washington almost unanimously. So some of the electoral votes will go to other places, but Washington will definitely get the majority of the popular votes in addition to the electoral votes. So as you know, he's our first president. He's born in Virginia, February 22nd, which is one of the reasons we celebrate President's Day every February. He serves for 2 terms over 8 years. He did not have a political party, although he is going to lean more towards the Federalist Party than the Anti-Federalist. His vice president is going to be John Adams, and John Adams does not do a whole lot as vice president just because it's the new office, and the vice presidency is kind of just a president in waiting for the most part for most of American history. He was our former commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, and he was also president of the Continental Congress as they were drafting the Constitution. So on April 30th, 1789, our new government and our new Constitution take effect. Washington begins his presidency in New York City and alternates between there and Philadelphia. So the Continental Congress and the Congress of the United States is kind of meeting in Philadelphia at first, but our capital city is going to be New York City at first, which is why if you went to Lower Manhattan today, you'll see a big statue of Washington from where he gave his inaugural address. Washington, D.C. is not even created until a few years later. So you can see Washington, one of his precedents, one of the things that he leaves us with is the idea of a cabinet. So he creates a group of advisors that's going to help head up different agencies of the government. So he selects Thomas Jefferson to be our foreign affairs person, to be the Secretary of State. He wants Alexander Hamilton to lead the Department of the Treasury. The Department of War is led by Henry Knox. It eventually becomes called the Department of Defense. The Attorney General, the top lawyer in the land, the Department of Justice leader is Edmund Randolph, and the Postmaster General is a guy named Samuel Osgood. But you can see already the idea that he is creating positions for these people. It's going to be a jumping off point for them to be future presidents, at least in terms of Thomas Jefferson, but it's also showing he needs help with this executive branch, and this cabinet is going to do nothing but expand as we get through American history. So one of the first issues he has to deal with is in western Pennsylvania. There are Pennsylvania farmers who are producing whiskey. It gets called the Whiskey Rebellion because they are rebelling because they're refusing to pay a tax on whiskey that was signed into law by President Washington. They believed it was unfair because it was taxing their income. So we don't have an income tax at this point in history, but this was specifically taxing their income. So we saw in Shays' Rebellion before the Constitution that proved that the Articles was too weak. The Whiskey Rebellion is eventually going to prove that the Constitution is strong enough to stop things like this from happening. So Washington himself will lead 13,000 troops to crush the Whiskey Rebellion. It's kind of they're testing the power of the Constitution. It demonstrates that the Constitution was powerful enough to deal with any sort of domestic rebellions from this mobocracy, and the national government is legitimate and has power. So when the Shays' Rebellion shows that the Articles is too weak, the Whiskey Rebellion shows that the Constitution is working and the executive branch is working. So one of the reasons we even had the Whiskey Rebellion is because Alexander Hamilton has a big plan for how we're going to get the country out of debt. As we talked about with the Articles, we're in a massive debt because of we were unable to tax under the Articles of Confederation. So he needs to strengthen the economy. So Alexander Hamilton, as the Treasurer of the United States, is going to create a plan to fix these problems. So our federal debt is quite large. We have a foreign debt of over $11 million, a domestic debt to those loyalists from the American Revolution of $42 million, and a state debt individually of $21 million across each state. So his plan is to create a tax system. He's going to create tariffs on goods produced from other countries to get American business going. He's going to create that excise tax on whiskey that causes the Whiskey Rebellion, and a bunch of other miscellaneous revenue. So we have an $80 million debt. creates this excise tax. Taxes placed on manufactured goods. He puts a tariff, and the whole idea was if we can pay off this debt, we can establish good credit. We can't pay it off immediately, but if we can establish good credit, national banks from other countries will be able to loan us money because they know we will pay back our debts. So he creates a national bank to create a national currency, and it assumes all the debt of these states. It's no longer Massachusetts' debt like it was in Shays' Rebellion. It's going to be our debt, the national debt, and they're going to raise money for government backed by gold and silver, so we're on the gold standard. He has to compromise with Thomas Jefferson, though, because Thomas Jefferson doesn't believe that the federal government has the power to do a lot of this stuff. So this Assumption Act, where the federal government assumes the state's debts, leads eventually to the creation of Washington, D.C., because for Jefferson to okay that and allow it to happen with his supporters, the Anti-Federalists, he says, okay, we need to create a capital, and let's make that capital in D.C. D.C. will kind of be part of Virginia and of Maryland, so it kind of is in a more southern area. Jefferson is from Virginia, so he's happy that the national capital is there, and it kind of situates the capital in the center of what was originally the 13 colonies, and that's all the compromise between Hamilton's financial plan and Jefferson wanting to move the capital. So again, just to summarize, how's he going to pay off the debt? He first assumes control over all the state debt. It becomes a national debt. He's going to sell bonds into the country to pay off the debt. So a bond is an investment in the country. If you give the federal government money, they'll give you a bond that is going to be worth more money than you originally paid for it later on. You just have to wait it out, but it's getting the federal government money now. He creates the national bank, so we have a national currency, and he's going to raise miscellaneous taxes and tariffs to make enough money to pay off the debt. So Hamilton and Jefferson disagree strongly on his plan, especially with the Bank of the United States. Hamilton thinks that it is a safe place to deposit and transfer money that the federal government collects. It's going to be a strong bank as opposed to these smaller banks that are in individual states. The government could loan money to state banks and therefore keep them going. It would create a national currency. The people would have an investment to buy stocks and buy bonds in the bank, so people would feel invested in their own economy. The Constitution did not forbid the national bank, so Hamilton is that loose constructionist. He says that if the Constitution doesn't forbid it, we can do it. And the national debt is good for the country because it kind of brings us together. Jefferson, on the other side, is going to say this is against the Constitution, and state banks would collapse if the national bank became a better bank because of competition. He said that only the wealthy could invest in the bank because they have the money to invest, so it would hurt the common man. And Jefferson is a strict constructionist. If it is not mentioned in the Constitution that you can do it, then you can't. Okay? He is against this national debt because he believes it will oppress the common man. So you're seeing the beginnings of the Federalist and Anti-Federalist parties. So in these parties, we get two leaders. Jefferson and Hamilton are the biggest leaders, but John Adams is also going to be a strong Federalist, and James Madison is going to be an Anti-Federalist, or now called the Democratic Republicans. So the Federalists get their appeal to manufacturers, merchants, generally the wealthy and educated people from seaboard cities, from coastal cities. They wanted loose construction, so a stronger government over the states. Implied powers meant that they could do more things than the Constitution said they could. As long as it didn't say they could do it, they would do it. And they preferred a government similar to a king because it had worked for them prior to the American Revolution. They wanted to limit freedom of speech and press to only necessary things. Their domestic policy was they wanted this bank in the United States. They wanted excise taxes on whiskey. They thought the federal debt was good. National government should assume state debts, and tariffs should be high so that those merchants can sell goods to Americans, so that those manufacturers can sell goods to Americans. So you can see why they would support it. Their foreign policy was that they opposed the French Revolution. They did not like the French, and they favored the British, mostly because the British were a wealthier country. If you recall, the French are in massive debt because we didn't pay back our debt from the American Revolution. He wants to pay back that debt, Hamilton does, but he favors the British because they're a stronger country. On the other side, Jefferson and Madison are more representing the common man. They wanted strict construction of the Constitution to limit it to just what it says. Their goal was to have common men, but have them educated. The Bill of Rights is sacred and cannot be damaged in any way, and the lesser government, the better. Okay, they were against the National Bank. They basically have the exact opposite domestic policy of the Federalists. Now, they support the French. Jefferson is all about ideals, and the French Revolution is about ideals. He says that we should support them. They supported us, and they're doing a revolution from a monarchy just like we were. So they favor the French over the British because they say, well, why would we favor the British when we just fought a war against them? So you can see there are large degrees of difference. They're basically polar opposites in our first political parties. So you can see the differences shown here again, but the major similarities is that Washington includes both Federalists and Democratic Republicans or Anti-Federalists in his parties. They're both political parties, and they want to run their government the only way. But this will create our political system that we know today. Washington didn't believe in political parties, but during his tenure of office, they will be created. So in the Constitution, we created a Supreme Court. It's under Article 3, and Washington will appoint 6 justices to the Supreme Court. Now, that's a slight problem because 6 is an even number, but he tries to keep it even. That doesn't always work out so well, but he selects 3 justices from northern states, 3 from southern. In 1789, one of the first acts that Congress creates is the Judiciary Act of 1789, which creates lower courts to assist the Supreme Court. So not every federal court case had to be heard by the Supreme Court. Other courts could hear them and make decisions on them before they got to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court is an appellate court, meaning that if you break a federal law, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to the Supreme Court. It could go to other lower federal courts. So one of the other domestic issues that Washington faces is problems with Native Americans. The British are still in those forts in the western part of the country, and they're supplying the tribes with arms and ammunition to attack western settlers. So General Washington sends General Mad Anthony Wayne to defeat Native American tribes out there. So these Native American wars will continue really until about the year 1900. So as Mad Anthony Wayne goes out, there's these several tribes who have different wars between 1790 and 1791 in the Northwest Territories. They're led by a man named Little Turtle of Miamis, which is why there's a city named Miami, not just in Florida. But eventually the Miamis are defeated at Fallen Timbers by Mad Anthony Wayne, and this kind of puts to rest some of the Native American issues we have at the beginning of our country. So you can see here what lands were lost before 1783, before the Treaty of Paris is signed in the American Revolution to Native Americans, and between 1784 and 1850 you can see a massive new amount of land is going to be lost by Native Americans. Eventually, we signed the Treaty of Greenville to kind of settle some of the Native American issues. It gave the United States the right to settle most of Ohio, and it is the first formal recognition of Indian sovereignty over land not ceded by treaty. So they do maintain some of their lands, but we continue to move west. This treaty is going to be broken by future treaties, and that kind of becomes what we do with Native Americans. We sign a treaty, and then we kind of go against it when we find we need more land or we find resources on that land. So, Washington sets several precedents during his first presidency, which is just an example that others follow, and it becomes part of a tradition. One of them will be creating a cabinet. He only serves 2 terms. He could have served several others if he wanted to. He could have kept running, but he did not want to. So he goes home to Virginia after 2 terms. He creates the idea or uses the idea of executive privilege. That is the right of the president to withhold information from Congress and the courts if necessary. And he has the ability to enforce the supremacy of federal law, as in the Whiskey Rebellion. So, some other precedents that he sets are what we call him. So, as I think I've said in class, one of the first debates in Congress is what do we call him? What is his title? And he simply chooses the title of Mr. President. Each president sets their own personal style. He creates the cabinet to advise him. He gives the vice president no official duties, and none are really given to him by the Constitution. The president acts independently from Congress. Congress relies on the advice of the president, and he serves 2 terms. So you can see several precedents that he sets during his first term. So that concludes our discussion of President Washington's domestic problems. We'll then continue with his foreign policy issues later on.